Frank Warren claiming that he's ready and willing to put Moses Itauma, who's just 11-0 currently, in against Martin Bakole, who is 21-2-1. He claims he would put Itauma in against Bakole 1,000,000% next. Obviously, this will be after Itauma's next fight on the Josh Taylor undercard. I'm going to call cap on Frank Warren's claim. I don't believe it. I think what Frank Warren is doing is engaging in PR. A lot of people say that sparring doesn't mean anything, and we should just ignore sparring stories and anything that happens in sparring. Okay, well, let me tell you somebody who doesn't ignore sparring. Frank Warren. He said out of his own mouth, one of the main reasons he signed Daniel Dubois was because he'd heard that Dubois had knocked out or dropped or bashed up Anthony Joshua in sparring. Go look up the interview. That's what Frank Warren said out of his own mouth. That was one of the main reasons he signed Dubois, is because he heard about what he did to AJ in sparring. So while some of you guys may not care about sparring stories, might not read too much into it, Frank Warren was so impressed by a sparring story that he was willing to actually sign somebody to, I think it was a 5-year deal. Do you know what I mean? It's not like Daniel Dubois was some type of Olympian. He wasn't. I think he only had a couple of senior bouts. The vast majority of his amateur career was as a junior. But Frank Warren was so impressed by the sparring story, he's like, sign him up. Now, obviously, Frank Warren would have known that the sparring story was true. He would have had people that were there, that he'd spoken to, etc., etc. But either way, it's something that happened in sparring, which Frank Warren bought into. Now, after Martin Bakole beat Jared Anderson, an unbeaten prospect, he was breathing down Daniel Dubois' neck. He was telling everybody about how he had bashed up Daniel Dubois in sparring. Again, you might not buy anything into it, but we're thinking about Frank Warren here. I'm absolutely convinced that Frank Warren was trying to keep Daniel Dubois away from Martin Bakole after that Jared Anderson fight in particular, because he will have known all about Dubois getting bashed up and stopped in sparring by Bakole. He will have known all about that. And since he signed Dubois, at least partly based on bashing AJ up in sparring, again, think about Frank Warren's thought process here. He was so impressed, Dubois sparring, he was like, let me sign him. Well, how impressed must he have been with Martin Bakole then, who bashed Dubois up in the gym several times apparently? I'm absolutely of the view that Frank Warren was looking to keep Daniel Dubois away from Bakole. Okay? So much so that after Dubois beat AJ, Frank Warren tried to retroactively have the IBF recognize the AJ fight as a mandatory defense. Because Martin Bakole was like ranked number 1 or something, or very high up in the IBF. And he was supposed to have the final eliminator against the Jagba, right? The Jagba fight was no longer a final eliminator because Martin Bakole lost before then. But originally it was supposed to be a final eliminator. And the IBF expedite their mandatories much quicker than the other sanctioning bodies. I think with the IBF, there's a mandatory once every 9 months. So it's a very short mandatory cycle compared to the other organizations. And so if you don't want your guy Daniel Dubois fighting Bakole because of what happened in the gym sparring and Dubois just beating AJ, what do? Well, you try to kick the can down the road, put pressure on the IBF to try and retroactively recognize the AJ fight as a mandatory defense, which it never was. AJ's fight against Otto Wallin was a standard eliminator. It wasn't a final eliminator. It was just a standard eliminator, a ranking match. And Frank Warren tried to have it retroactively changed. It would seem anyway, based upon what he was saying. I don't know whether he actually did anything behind the scenes. Okay, let me just make that clear. But the way he was talking, he kept on saying that the AJ fight was a mandatory defense. No, it wasn't. So for me, that was Frank Warren trying to keep Bakole away from Dubois for as long as possible because he was concerned after what had happened in sparring, and especially after Bakole's performance against Anderson. Again, You guys, or whoever out there, can say Anderson was always rubbish, he was always a hype job, blah, 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 and act like a know-it-all. You have to put yourself in the shoes and look at things from the perspective of a promoter. Promoters are not as gung-ho, and they're not so cocksure as fans are. Yeah? Promoters are much more cautious about what they do with their fighters and who they match them with than fans are. This is what you have to understand. And I think Frank Warren was very cautious about putting Dubois in there against Bakole. I think he was trying to kick the can down the road. Also, Bakole was set to fight in a final eliminator. Originally, I think it was against Caballel. And Caballel pulled out of the purse bid. What's that all about? Claimed that Martin Bakole asked for too much money. Well, hang on. It's a purse bid. You get 30 days to negotiate when two fighters are about to have a final eliminator. If you can't come to a deal because somebody's asking for too much money, you just go through the purse bid then. And whoever wins the bid, that'll decide the purse. So what Ajit Caballel was saying made no sense. And by the way, this isn't me saying that Bakole beats Caballel or Caballel. It's irrelevant. I'm just talking about what actually happened. Okay? Caballel pulled out of fighting Martin Bakole. That's a fact. For no good reason, or certainly no good reason that he gave. Then it is revealed that Ajit Caballel is being managed by Spencer Brown, and I think he's now promoted by Frank Warren. So Frank Warren keeping another fighter away from Martin Bakole. And then Zheli Zhang. It was one way or the other. It was either Zhang first that pulled out and then Caballel pulled out. I think it was Caballel pulled out first and then Zhang pulled out of fighting Bakole. Maybe they used the same excuse. I can't remember. And again, I'm not saying either of those guys was afraid of Martin Bakole. I'm talking about Frank Warren here. Because Zhang, again, is a Frank Warren fighter. So he's trying to keep all these guys away from Bakole. Now that Bakole's been chinned by Joseph Parker, and yeah, he let Parker, another one of his fighters, go in there against Bakole, but Bakole was taking the fight on like 2 days' notice. What kind of shape could he possibly be in? Flying halfway across the world. So he gets chinned by Joseph Parker. He then looks pretty damn terrible in his next fight against F.A. Jagba. And now Frank Warren wants to come out and say, I never bought any of this stuff about him being a boogeyman or bogeyman, right? In the US, they call it boogeyman. In the UK, we say bogeyman. I never bought all this stuff about him being a bogeyman. And he's like making a point of really trying to deride Martin Bakole. He's never any good. So why then did you basically get two of your fighters to pull out of fights with him? Well, I can't say that Frank Warren got them to do it, but the fact that they did pull out of fights with him is suggestive that either Frank Warren or Spencer Brown had something to do with it. That's what it suggests as an outsider looking in that has no knowledge, no inside knowledge of the situation. And then, if he never rated Bakole, why was he trying to say that the AJ Dubois fight was a mandatory defense for Daniel Dubois when it never was? Why was he trying to say that? The only explanation I have is that he wanted the IBF to retroactively recognize it as such so that he could push the Bakole defense, which was looming for Daniel Dubois, further down the road. So hindsight is always 20/20. Everybody now is saying, or most people now are saying, Bakole was a hype job. He was never any good. He was never really the boogeyman. It was all a load of rubbish. That's all well and dandy. But again, I'm asking people to look at things from Frank Warren's perspective. Do you believe that Frank Warren was never worried about putting Dubois in against Bakole? I think he absolutely was. Is he as worried now? No, because Bakole looked terrible in his last two fights. Terrible against Joseph Parker. Okay, we can let that one slide given the circumstances, but we can't let the Ajagba fight slide. So after those two performances, of course, Frank Warren's going to be more confident of putting many of his fighters in there against Bakole. But as far as putting Itauma in there, see, this is all part of diminishing Bakole to try and justify what he's done with his fighters in the past, in my opinion. Frank Warren is really leaning into talking Bakole down to justify what he did in the past. You see what I'm saying? But I don't fall for it. I don't buy it. And I don't buy this idea. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. But I'm just telling you my perspective. I don't buy this idea that Frank Warren's willing to put Itauma in with Bakole next. I do not buy it for a second. And that's not to say that Itauma can't win the fight. But Frank Warren knows boxing. He knows that Itauma is green. And he knows that the Martin Bakole fight really doesn't benefit Itauma to an extent worthy of the risk. So I think this is cap from Frank Warren. And we know he doesn't like Ben Shalom. That's another reason to not make this fight, to not give Ben Shalom an opportunity to take down his up-and-coming heavyweight prospect. The guy whose name is on everybody's lips, irrespective of what you think about Bakole. Maybe you say his hype job was always rubbish. Do you seriously think that Frank Warren, and this is heavyweight boxing, anything can happen. Even if a guy's a big favorite, anything can happen. When these big men in tiny gloves start swinging fists, anyone can get knocked out. Do you really think that Frank Warren would give Ben Shalom the opportunity to put Martin Bakole in there against Itauma next? A guy who's 11-0, if he wins his next fight, 12-0. You seriously think Frank Warren would give Ben Shalom that opportunity? Imagine Martin Bakole fights Itauma. Maybe Itauma's winning the fight, gets caught, or gets tired and Bakole wins. Imagine the narrative. Imagine what a story that would be for Bakole and for Ben Shalom. Frank Warren's not going to risk that. At least not in my estimation, and not yet. Maybe some fights down the line, if Itauma keeps progressing and Bakole keeps deteriorating. But as it stands right now, I don't see it at all. I think it's all cap from Frank Warren, a way of justifying the fact that a couple of his fighters pulled out of fighting Bakole in the past. And in my opinion, he was trying to keep Daniel Dubois away from Bakole too. We'll throw it over to the chat. See what you guys think about all of this stuff. Firstly, big up Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, Martin Bakole admitted he declined Turkey's offer to fight Zhang and Kabayel. He said it to Radio Raheem. Guess you haven't seen the interview. No, I'm aware of Martin Bakole saying that, but those fights were headed to a purse bid. Martin Bakole didn't pull out of the purse bid. During the negotiation process in the run-up to a final eliminator, there are going to be offers back and forth. So it doesn't really matter if Turkey made offers and Bakole turned the offer down. It was headed to a purse bid. And it wasn't Martin Bakole that pulled out of the purse bid. Evidently, Bakole wanted it to go to a purse bid to try and drive his money up. That's generally what happens. If you can't agree a fee, if you don't like the money you're being offered in negotiations, the best way to get more money is let it go to a purse bid, and then multiple promoters can bid for it. But Ajit Kabayel and Zheli Zhang both pulled out. So, but shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. Like I say, offers are made back and forth during negotiations. So Bakole turning down an offer during negotiations is really neither here nor there, because he was still willing to go to the purse bid. Kabayel and Zhang were not. Shout out to Mr. Luca, as always. Jackie Boy Johnson says, I thought Hrgovic bashed him up too, as in Daniel Dubois. Well, yeah, but the difference being, Daniel Dubois, when he fought Hrgovic, was fighting his way back from defeat. He wasn't yet champion. He didn't have anything to protect. When he became champion, now all of a sudden, they're moving in more carefully, in my opinion. I mean, many of you guys believe that Dubois pulled out of the Joseph Parker fight, right? And the injury was fake. Now, I'm not of that view, but as I say, I do think that since becoming champion, they're trying to be a lot more careful about who they match Dubois with. Obviously, he's fighting Usyk, but that's for all the marbles, undisputed. I'm talking about title defenses.